Now, that cultural Marxist framework, that lens, that view of the world that they promote, which, you know, I mean, obviously the hippie generation or the boomer generation, you guys get blamed for everything these days. So I'm happy for you to wear that. I'm Generation X. I went through university in the 1980s. This wasn't presented to us as cultural Marxism. It was presented to us as a lens through which to analyse the media, a lens through which to analyse film and art and literature and books and history.
That's right.
And so I learned it as, you know, I've got to think about this from a feminist perspective, or I've got to think about this as somebody's oppressing somebody. What's the oppression? Everything's oppression, right? There's always a power dynamic, and there's Now, there is a seed of truth to that, of course, and I guess that's what they play on. They build on that seed of truth. But as we're seeing now with things like the voice debate, there's a complete, or the anti-colonialism debate, there's a complete disregard for all the positives of colonialism, the positives of Western society and its origins and its history.
There is, and I mean, it's interesting. One of the arguments was, and I'll refer to Camille Paglia, the American non-binary feminist. One of her books, she talks about we're now living in a time of intolerance, where to be tolerant, in fact, is to be intolerant, and that's what is happening with cultural Marxism. Anybody who disagrees or who questions is shut down. When I was at university, I was lucky enough to be taught clear thinking, to be logical, to be rational, to weigh evidence. And it was wrong to attack the person in a debate. You had to look at the argument from an objective, impartial point of view, as I said, to weigh the evidence and the logic. But now, the cultural left, the argument is there is no logic, that's binary. So the idea is that if you want to be rational or sensible or weigh the evidence, that's being guilty of Western supremacy, of being binary. I was in a debate once in Sydney where I tried to put a case, and a young woman attacked me as male, pale and stale. So a lot of the people who are pushing this wokeness, they argue about diversity and difference and embracing people, but in fact they're very intolerant, and they rely on emotion to argue the case instead of logic and rationality.
Yeah, and it does involve a lot of pushing, categorizing people based on these identity factors, right? So it's your gender, it's your race, it's your sexuality, and then boxing them, putting them into a box, and just negating, you're pale, stale, and male. Well, okay, once upon a time we would have called that racist, sexist, and ageist to say
That's
pale,
right.
stale, and male. Now it's okay, now it's cool, and that seems to be the barometer, right? It's all about the feeling. Is it cool or not? But who are the people deciding what's in and what's out, what's cool and what's not? If you abandon logical thinking and call it, some Western construct. Logical thinking is not a Western construct. It existed in the East as well. It's a universal thing, isn't it? Logic.
Well, it should be, and again, that was the way I was taught. But I know with this kind of neo-colonial movement, there are university students in London who, for example, would argue that Western science, Western mathematics, Western even biology is Eurocentric, patriarchal. They have all of these words, these categories, binary and offensive, and they argue, in fact, that you should have native or indigenous science or mathematics or logic. In the Australian curriculum, which I reviewed for our government some years ago, students are now taught indigenous algebra. Now, I would have thought algebra went back to the Greeks and that Pythagoras had something to do with it. But no, young kids are now taught that Aborigines have algebra that should be studied. I know in Cape Town in Africa, I saw a YouTube of students there who argued get rid of Western medicine because it's a colonial import and we should go back to our own native medicine, I suppose based on witchcraft and voodoo. So it's quite strange that common sense and logic no longer apply. It's like we've gone down the rabbit hole, like Alice in Wonderland, where words can mean anything. It's, as I said before, George Orwell picked this up in his writings. In 1984, Big Brother and Newspeak is based on the idea that war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. So we're now living in that Orwellian world where words no longer have meaning. A man can be a woman can be a man, a boy can be a girl. So it's very dangerous, and it's interesting, and we might talk about it. I am positive because I do see that the pendulum is beginning to swing back.